Remember when two grown men drove a dog-shaped van across America to return a briefcase full of money that they absolutely should not have touched? Released in 1994 by New Line Cinema, Dumb and Dumber followed Lloyd Christmas, played by Jim Carrey, and Harry Dunn, played by Jeff Daniels, two hopelessly clueless friends who set out on a cross-country trip to Aspen, Colorado. Their mission was to return a forgotten briefcase to Mary Swanson, played by Lauren Holly, but their method was absolute chaos. Directed by Peter and Bobby Farrelly, the film leaned hard into slapstick, gross-out humor, and silent film-style physical comedy, and somehow turned a mid-budget gamble into a global hit. Today we're going to count down 15 weird and wild facts that you probably didn't know about Dumb and Dumber. And stick around for number 1, because the Aspen that you remember from this movie never actually existed, and the hotel they used has a connection to one of the most famous horror novels ever written. But before we jump in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hype up this video. It helps YouTube show this to more retro movie fans just like you. Alright, grab your orange tux and let's hit the road. Number 15. Lloyd's tooth? That wasn't special effects. That grin. Lloyd Christmas's unsettling, slightly deranged, haunts your dreams grin. It looked like something a makeup department spent hours perfecting. But it was real. When Jim Carrey was in grade school, a bully jumped him on the playground and chipped one of his front teeth. Over the years, he had it capped with a dental veneer and moved on with his life like a normal person. But then, Dumb and Dumber came along. Carrey was preparing for the role and decided that Lloyd didn't look dumb enough yet. Something was missing. Then, he remembered the old injury. So he called his dentist, had the veneer removed, and instantly transformed into Lloyd Christmas. The grin went from goofy to slightly unhinged in a single appointment. He kept the cap off for the entire shoot, which meant that this wasn't just an on-camera choice. Carrey walked around looking like that for months, off-set, in public, at dinner, wherever. The man fully committed to living inside Lloyd's face. And according to reports, Lauren Holly, who played Mary Swanson in the film, was not exactly thrilled about sharing a bed with that smile every night. But the chipped tooth became part of Lloyd's signature look. A childhood playground injury turned into one of the most recognizable grins in 90s comedy. Number 14. The comedy was half script and half chaos. Dumb and Dumber felt like a movie that was just barely under control. And that's because a solid chunk of it actually wasn't. An estimated 15% of the film was improvised. The production followed what they call a 2+1 rule. 2 scripted takes and then 1 where anything can happen. And Jim Carrey treated that third take like his personal playground. The most annoying sound in the world, that wasn't in the script. The scene originally just had Harry and Lloyd bickering in the car to irritate the hitman, Joe Mentalino. Then Carrey suddenly turned around and asked, "Hey, want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?" and then let it rip. If you watch closely, Jeff Daniels looks genuinely caught off guard before jumping in. And actor Mike Starr's terrified reaction was completely real. And then there's the big gulps moment. Those 2 guys standing outside the 7-Eleven, they weren't paid extras. They were local bystanders watching the filming. Carrey walked up to him and delivered, "Big gulps, huh? All right, well, see you later," and just left. Whether they fully understood that they were being filmed or were simply caught flat-footed by Jim Carrey appearing out of nowhere, the result was the same. That beautifully awkward non-response became one of the most quoted moments in the entire film. Even smaller beats were spontaneous. When Lloyd exits the bar in Aspen and spots a framed 1969 newspaper headline, his stunned, "No way, we landed on the moon," was completely ad-libbed. It perfectly sold the idea that Lloyd had been out of the loop for roughly 25 years. And the Farrellys loved it so much that they kept it in without hesitation. That loose, unpredictable energy was chaos by design. The Farrellys gave Carrey just enough rope to go anywhere. And the result was a movie where audiences could never quite tell what was scripted and what was a man simply losing his mind on camera. Number 13. I Got Worms accidentally became a business plan. The I Got Worms bit was written as an ultimate dumb business idea. Lloyd is absolutely convinced that specialized worm farms are the next big thing. He says it with total confidence, total belief, completely oblivious to how widely unappealing that pitch sounds. That was the joke. And then real life missed the punchline entirely. After the movie came out, actual worm-selling businesses started getting calls. Because yes, there were already legitimate companies selling worms, and some of them reported a spike in people quoting the movie or asking about European night crawlers. It didn't stop at phone calls either. Some fans were genuinely inspired enough to try launching their own worm farms after seeing the movie. Lloyd Christmas accidentally became a small business influencer. The storefront used for I Got Worms was part of the Breckenridge, Colorado shoot, where most of the film's Aspen street scenes were filmed. And while the fictional worm farm never opened for business, something else saw a very real surge: blue and orange tuxedos. After the movie's success, sales of those blinding prom and wedding suits skyrocketed. Buddy Halloween costumes haven't been the same since. The loudest formal wear in cinema history kicked off a fashion wave that absolutely nobody asked for. Number 12, the sea bass scam. It wasn't just dumb, it was meta. When Lloyd pulls the put it on his tab move at the diner and stiffs sea bass, he casually mentions that he learned the trick from a movie. That wasn't a throwaway line. That was a full-blown inside joke hiding in plain sight. In the 1986 film Something Wild, Jeff Daniels played a straight-laced businessman named Charlie who gets swept into chaos. Early in that movie, Melanie Griffith's character convinces him to skip out on a restaurant bill using the exact same scam. Casual distraction, quiet exit, gone before anyone notices. Fast forward to Dumb and Dumber, and Lloyd runs the identical con on Seabass with total confidence. And when Harry looks confused, Lloyd shrugs it off with, "I saw it in a movie." Jeff Daniels is standing right there while Lloyd describes a scam from a Jeff Daniels film, and Harry doesn't flinch. The obliviousness is doing double duty. Number 11, the Saturday morning version that nobody asked for. After Dumb and Dumber exploded in 1994, it joined the great 90s tradition of turning every hit movie into a Saturday morning cartoon. In 95, Hanna-Barbera brought Harry and Lloyd to ABC in animated form, and the show holds a strange little piece of TV history. It was the final Hanna-Barbera series to premiere on a major broadcast network. End of an era, courtesy of two guys who can't find Colorado on a map. But if you were expecting Jim Carrey or Jeff Daniels to come along for the ride, yeah, that didn't happen. Neither returned. Instead, Lloyd was voiced by Matt Frewer, best known as Max Headroom, and Harry was voiced by Bill Fagerbakke, who would later become the voice of Patrick Star on SpongeBob SquarePants. So Harry Dunn was essentially a warm-up act for another beloved idiot. And because this was a cartoon, things got appropriately ridiculous. The series introduced a pet purple beaver named Kitty. In a recurring gag, Harry and Lloyd were too dumb to realize that she was a beaver and kept treating her like a cat. I don't know. Every single episode, commitment to stupidity ran really deep. The show did have a real connection to the original film. It was written by Bennett Yellen, who co-wrote the 1994 screenplay, but that pedigree wasn't enough to keep it alive. 13 episodes, 5 months on the air, and then done. Number 10, written behind a motel front desk. Before Dumb and Dumber made hundreds of millions of dollars, Peter and Bobby Farrelly were managing a rundown motel in Cumberland, Rhode Island. Their father owned the place, and while the brothers were trying to break into Hollywood, they also worked the front desk to keep the lights on. And that's where they wrote the screenplay. Between checking in guests and answering the phone, they go right back to punching up jokes about two idiots on a road trip. That blue-collar writing environment became part of the creative DNA. It's often credited for the relatable, salt-of-the-earth humor that runs through their films. The kind of comedy that feels like it was written by guys who've actually had terrible jobs. Because, well, it was. And the motel wasn't even the rough part. Before Dumb and Dumber ever got made, the Farrellys had spent 9 years in Hollywood without getting a single movie produced. 9 years of rejection. During that development phase, they were reportedly living on credit card debt and sheer stubbornness. Number 9, Harry and Lloyd were a silent film throwback. Harry Dunn, Lloyd Christmas, put those first names together and you get Harold Lloyd. That wasn't an accident. The Farrelly brothers deliberately named the characters as a tribute to one of the biggest icons of silent film comedy. Harold Lloyd was famous for his thrill comedy stunts, probably most notably dangling from a clock tower in Safety Last back in 1923. The man was doing physical comedy at life-threatening altitudes decades before Jim Carrey ever put on an orange tuxedo. And the connection runs deeper than the name. Like Harold Lloyd's work, Dumb and Dumber leans hard into slapstick, big reactions, and high-energy body language that does as much heavy lifting as the dialogue. The Farrellys have often cited silent era legends like Lloyd, Buster Keaton, and Charlie Chaplin as major influences for the film's visual gags. The kind of comedy where a well-timed pratfall communicates more than a page of script ever could. There's even a personality link, too. Harold Lloyd's screen persona was typically an earnest, well-meaning guy who stumbled into absurd situations through sheer optimism. Harry and Lloyd aren't exactly resourceful, and aware would be a generous description, but they are genuinely earnest. They truly believe that they're doing the right thing by returning the briefcase. Underneath all the toilet humor and taped-up parakeets, Dumb and Dumber is quietly tipping its hat to a comedy tradition that's over a century old. Harold Lloyd would probably appreciate the homage once he got past the whole, laxative scene. Number 8, the gallbladder attack everyone thought was a bit. Jim Carrey could collapse on the floor in the middle of a scene and nobody would blink. That reputation nearly cost him a gallbladder. During production on Dumb and Dumber, Carrey suddenly doubled over in pain while filming at an airport. He hit the ground, rolled around, and the crew assumed that it was just one of his bits. This was a guy known for extreme physical comedy. Monkeying around was basically his resting state. so even the on-set medics didn't immediately panic. It looked like classic Carney chaos, but it wasn't. The pain was real. He was having a gallbladder attack. Once everyone realized that this wasn't slapstick, but a genuine medical emergency, Carrey was rushed to the hospital. Doctors removed his gallbladder and advised rest, which would already be dramatic enough, but then it got weirder. Co-star Karen Duffy asked if she could have his gallstones after the procedure, so she could turn them into cufflinks. Carrey, well, he agreed, and then later told her that he'd already given them to the woman that he was dating at the time. The man treated his own organ stones like party favors. What? And despite doctors telling him to take it easy, Carrey came back to set almost immediately. His first day back, the Farrelly brothers had him film the physically demanding briefcase fight scene with Jeff Daniels, rolling around on the ground, full contact, because it was the only night that they could secure that location. Gallbladder removed, doctors overruled, and back on the floor doing slapstick like nothing happened. The man was physically incapable of not being Jim Carrey. Hey, quick pause real quick. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of the most chaotic comedies of all the 90s, hit that like button. It tells YouTube that you want more behind-the-scenes stories from movies that had no business working. And drop a comment with your favorite Dumb and Dumber moment. All right, let's get back to the road trip. Number 7, the blind kid punchline that took 20 years. Billy in 4C, the blind kid, the head taped back on, well, that joke landed in 1994 and then sat quietly in a corner for 2 decades waiting for its encore. In the original film, Billy is the kid that Lloyd scams by selling him Petey, a very dead bird with its head very much taped back into place. It's one of the most memorably cruel gags in the movie, and everyone assumed that that was just the end of it. 20 years later, Brady Bluhm, the actor who played Billy, came back to reprise the role in Dumb and Dumber 2, making it one of the longest-running punchline callbacks in comedy sequel history. And the behind-the-scenes version is almost funnier than the bit itself. When the Farrelly brothers started working on the sequel, they weren't even sure what had happened to Bluhm. He had long since left acting and was working as an educator. So how did they track him down? Facebook. The internet dragged Billy and 4C back into show business. Even though he was the original actor, the studio still made him audition for his own role. They needed to know if the timing was still there. And he passed. Apparently 2 decades, it didn't dull the delivery. In the sequel, Billy is now an adult, still living in the same apartment, surrounded by a massive collection of rare exotic birds. And Lloyd, naturally, still hits him with the same line. Pretty bird. Number 6, the studio tried to replace Harry before he even started. Jeff Daniels was not New Line Cinema's first choice for Harry. In fact, the studio was pretty adamant that they didn't want him at all. Daniels was known for dramatic work like Gettysburg. Not exactly the resume that you wave around when pitching a movie where a man's tongue freezes to a ski lift. The studio wanted a bigger comedic name, and they weren't shy about it. So they lowballed him with an offer, hoping that Daniels would take one look at it, feel insulted, and then walk away. But he accepted immediately. The plan backfired so fast, it left skid marks. And to make matters worse, the studio was so skeptical of Daniels that they kept a comedian on standby during the first week of filming. They reviewed his dailies every night before finally, and grudgingly, committing to him. The man showed up to work every day knowing someone else was sitting in the parking lot in case he bombed. And the pressure wasn't just coming from the studio. Daniels' own agents were terrified. They warned him that the film would kill his dramatic career, that Jim Carrey would wipe him off the screen, and that serious roles would dry up overnight. Meanwhile, Nick Cage had already been offered Harry. Cage reportedly tried to negotiate a $2 million bump to his fee. The studio, you can guess, refused.
Hell no, to the no, 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 yeah, to the no.
And he passed, and he went on to film Leaving Las Vegas instead. Now that earned him an Academy Award, so Harry almost belonged to an Oscar winner who wanted nothing to do with the price tag. But both the Farrelly brothers and Jim Carrey fought hard to keep Daniels. Carrey specifically wanted a real actor who could ground him, not another comedian competing for the same energy. He understood that the movie needed a straight man who could sell the absurdity without winking at the camera. Number 5, the salary that rewrote Hollywood's paycheck rules. When Jim Carrey first signed on for Dumb and Dumber, his deal, it was a respectable $350,000, which is solid money for a comedian who was still building his name. Then, Ace Ventura: Pet Detective hit theaters, and it didn't just do well, it camped out at number 1 for weeks like it had no intention of leaving. With every week it stayed there, Carrey's asking price climbed. $350,000 turned into renegotiations. And renegotiations, they turned into $7 million, nearly half the movie's entire budget. That kind of leverage almost never happens mid-production. Studios were watching Ace Ventura print money in real time. And suddenly, the guy they signed for a modest payday, well, he was the most in-demand comedian on the planet. And it didn't stop there. Dumb and Dumber's success, stacked on top of Ace Ventura and The Mask, turned Carrey into the first actor to command a $20 million upfront salary. For 1996's The Cable Guy, in a span of about 2 years, he went from promising comedian to the guy who single-handedly reset what Hollywood was willing to pay a funny person. Number 4, the title that sounded like a hardware store disclaimer. Before Dumb and Dumber proudly embraced its own stupidity, the Farrelly brothers gave their script a title that sounded like something printed on the side of a lawnmower. A power tool is not a toy. They pulled the phrase straight from a warning label. Completely random, completely absurd, which, to be fair, did fit two guys whose combined decision-making skills hover somewhere near zero. But the terrible title was deliberate. Agents and studio executives kept rejecting anything that sounded like a dumb comedy on sight. So the brothers figured that if the script looked like a quirky indie film or an offbeat drama, people might actually crack it open before tossing it in the trash. It was a decoy. And even with the hardware store disguise, the script was still rejected by every major studio in Hollywood. But A Power Tool is Not a Toy did serve one lasting purpose. It became a reminder that sometimes the best comedy has to sneak in through the back door. Number 3, the dog van was a real vehicle under all that fur. The Mutt Cuts van, that shaggy, tongue-wagging, ear-flopping mobile dog grooming unit that had no business being street legal, well, that was built on top of a 1984 Ford Econoline. Not exactly the most glamorous base model, but look, glamour was never really the point. The production team covered the entire thing, inside and out, in over 1,700 square feet of 3-inch shag carpeting. That's enough carpet to floor a decent-sized house. And instead, they glued it to a van and then gave it a nose. Floppy ears, stubby legs, that wagging tail, and that pink tongue hanging off the front bumper, it completed the look. And if you needed gas, you had to lift the rear dog leg to reach the cap, because of course you did. They actually built 2 versions, one on the Ford Econoline and a backup built from a Chevrolet van. The Chevy version was never used on camera, making it the most over-engineered understudy in comedy film history. And keeping the thing camera-ready was a constant headache. Shag carpet, it's not exactly designed for highway speeds and mountain weather. Between the wind, moisture, and general wear from actually driving the van through Colorado, the exterior needed regular upkeep just to keep it from looking like a wet dog, which, look, to be fair, it already kind of was, which is one of the best throwaway lines in the entire movie. And after the film became a hit, the Mutt Cuts van, it became one of the most replicated movie vehicles in the country, right up there with the DeLorean and the Ecto-1. Fan-built versions still show up at car shows, Comic-Cons, and the occasional very confused neighborhood. Number 2, the $17 million bet that paid off. Dumb and Dumber was made for an estimated $16 to $17 million, mid-range budget. And as we covered at the top of the list, a massive chunk of that went straight to Jim Carrey. The studio was essentially gambling the entire production on a comedian whose star had only just caught fire, and they were sweating. Then the movie hit theaters on December 16th of 1994. It opened at number 1 with $16.4 million and didn't budge. For 4 straight weeks during the holiday season, it held the top spot while everything else fought for scraps underneath it. By the end of its theatrical run, Dumb and Dumber had grossed $127.1 million domestically and $120.1 million internationally, a worldwide total of approximately $247.3 mil. Now, on a $17 million budget, that's the kind of return that'll make a studio accountant weep tears of joy. And it capped off something even bigger. In 10 months, Carrey had starred in Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, $107 million, The Mask, $351 million, and Dumb and Dumber, $247 million. That's over $700 million in global box office in a single calendar year. The man went from rising comedian to the most bankable face in Hollywood at a pace that looks absurd even today. The profitability didn't stop at the box office either. The movie became a cult classic through home video sales and cable syndication, eventually spawning an animated series, a 2003 prequel, and a 2014 sequel. Number 1, Aspen was a lie. Now, for a movie that plays like a love letter to Aspen, Colorado, almost none of it was actually filmed there. In fact, the real Aspen reportedly turned the production down. So the crew did what Hollywood does best. They built their own Aspen across 2 different states. Most of the outdoor street scenes, including the glorious moped arrival, were filmed in Breckenridge, Colorado. The ski village vibe was perfect. Snowy sidewalks, instant Aspen energy without the hassle of actually being Aspen. And then you got Park City, Utah. The fancy gala scenes and many of the hotel interiors were shot at Deer Valley Resort. That polished high-end mountain luxury that screams old money. Yeah, that's Utah. The airport scenes weren't even in Colorado. They were filmed at Salt Lake City International Airport, hundreds of miles from where Harry and Lloyd were supposedly headed. And the Danbury Hotel exterior was actually the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, the same hotel that inspired Stephen King to write The Shining. The snowy rom-com fantasy hotel doubles as horror literature history. And in true Dumb and Dumber fashion, Jim Carrey reportedly checked out of the Stanley in the middle of the night during filming because he claimed that it was haunted. The man fought off imaginary ghosts, but couldn't handle an imaginary ghost. The most convincing thing about Dumb and Dumber's Aspen is that it never existed. And there you have it, 15 weird and wild facts about Dumb and Dumber. Which fact surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments, and hey, share this with a friend who still quotes big gulps, unironically. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, this is Remember When.